Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another edition of MJ Every Day, a diet and supplementation based episode for you guys today. Going to be talking about plant-based protein and in particular plant-based protein powders, the pros and also the cons of plant-based protein powders. Very topical in the industry at the moment, guys. A lot of people are replacing their whey protein powder or their beef protein powder or their animal source protein powder with a plant-based protein powder, and a lot gets spoken about the positives, the pros of doing that, all the benefits associated with moving from an animal source protein powder to a plant-based protein powder, and a lot of companies are jumping on board. There are a lot of companies now that you would never have thought would have got into the plant-based protein powder game and now making plant-based protein powders to kind of fill that demand, to fill that shift in consumers moving from whey protein or beef protein to a plant-based protein. So I want to break it down for you guys real quick and look at the positives of doing that. Look at the benefits of moving to a plant-based protein powder, because there are a few, and then also look at the cons, look at the negatives of moving from a whey protein powder in particular to a plant-based protein powder. Just so you guys, if you've made the shift already, or if you're thinking of making the shift, to give you as much information as we can possibly give you to allow you to make the right decision for yourself. So firstly, looking at the pros, looking at the benefits of moving from an animal sourced protein powder to a plant-based protein powder. The first and most obvious one is no animals are part of that process. So no animals are harmed in the process. No animals are slaughtered in the process. So if you're looking at making this change for ethical reasons to get away from animal sourced protein powders, whether it be whey protein, whether it be beef protein, or whatever animal sourced protein powder, to a plant-based protein powder, you're definitely going to satisfy that ethical reasoning for doing so, because plant-based protein powders don't involve the use of animals through their production. So that's the first pro. Extending on that a little bit, for a lot of people, the ethical side of it may not involve animals so much, but it may involve the environment. So moving from a protein powder that involves animals in its production and therefore harms the environment through that process, moving to a plant-based protein has much less effects, much less detrimental effects on the environment than an animal source protein. So if you're looking at making the change for ethical reasons, definitely that's a benefit of moving from an animal source protein to a plant-based protein. The other major benefit is for people that have issues with digestion, and in particular issues with digestion of dairy or lactose, and the two are obviously related. So if you're the sort of person that, every time you use a whey protein, whether it be a concentrate and isolate, you have digestive upset, you have GI issues, gastrointestinal tract issues, it just doesn't sit well with you, and you're looking to move away from a dairy-based protein and you don't want to go to a beef-based protein, then a plant-based protein is obviously going to satisfy that as well, because there's no dairy, and because there's no dairy, there's no lactose. So if that's the source of gastrointestinal issues for you, and you do have digestive issues with dairy-based protein in particular, obviously you can look at beef, but then if you don't want to look at beef protein powder, you go to plant protein powder, and that's definitely another benefit of moving in that direction. Those are the two main pros, the two main benefits of plant-based protein powders. Flipping the switch real quick and looking at the negatives or the cons of moving to a plant-based protein powder, definitely the most noticeable, and for those of you who have tried plant-based protein powders, this is the first thing that you notice, is the taste and the consistency is definitely not as pleasant as a whey-based protein powder, and most of the time not as pleasant as a beef-based protein powder. The taste is definitely getting better. We've seen a lot of development in the flavoring of plant-based proteins over the last few years. Obviously, as the market for those for plant-based proteins grow and companies invest more and more R&D in actually flavoring and getting the products to taste good, we've definitely seen improvements. But I still, my personal opinion, and pretty much everyone at MassiveJoes, because we try a lot of different protein powders, you take the absolute best tasting plant-based protein powder on the market at the moment, and it still doesn't compare to a really pleasantly tasting whey protein. And in most cases, even a beef protein is much better tasting than a plant-based protein. And then following up on that, the consistency. So one thing that you're always going to have with plant-based proteins that there's really no way around is there's always going to be a gritty consistency to it. There's always going to be that kind of earthy, gritty consistency that you just don't get with animal-based protein powders. You just don't get it with whey protein. You just don't get it with beef protein. Whey protein tends to have a nice creamy consistency. Beef protein tends to have quite a thin, watery consistency, whereas plant-based proteins are always going to have that kind of gritty, earthy type consistency. So those are the initial negatives to moving from an animal-based protein to a plant-based protein. And then the second one that really doesn't get spoken about often enough, and I think because a lot of people don't really understand it, is the fact that plant-based proteins, for the most part, are incomplete sources of protein. Now, what that means, guys, is the whole purpose for us consuming a peptide-bound protein source. So the whole point of us consuming a protein source, whether it comes from a whey protein powder, whether it comes from a beef protein powder, whether it comes from a plant protein powder, whether it comes from a whole food protein source like a chicken breast or tuna or eggs or any source of protein, the whole reason for us consuming that protein is to get essential amino acids, is to get these building blocks that allow our body to repair and rebuild tissue. That's the whole purpose of consuming protein, is to get essential amino acids. Now, when we look at plant-based proteins and the naturally occurring peptide-bound essential amino acids that naturally occur in most plant-based protein sources, most of them are missing 4 main essential amino acids. They're missing lysine, they're missing tryptophan, they're missing methionine, and they're missing phenylalanine. Those essential amino acids don't occur naturally in plants and plant-based protein sources. They do occur naturally in pretty much every other protein source, which is obviously going to be animal, whether it's whey, beef, chicken breast, tuna, eggs, whatever it may be. Those protein sources we refer to as complete because they have a full spectrum, a full range of essential amino acids that our bodies require to rebuild and reheal tissue, all sorts of tissue, hair, nail, skin, muscle, whatever tissue it is. That rebuilding process, our body requires a full spectrum of amino acids from either a food or a supplementary source. So when you go from an animal-based protein powder to a plant-based protein powder, you're going to be missing out on those essential amino acids, those 4 essential amino acids. So you do really need to consider that. And if you are going to move to a plant-based protein powder, you need to be supplementing from a supplementary source with those 4 amino acids to ensure that you're getting a sufficient amount of them to allow your body to do what it needs to do with the protein, rebuild and reheal tissue. So that's probably the biggest con that doesn't get mentioned a lot because people really don't understand essential aminos and peptide-bound proteins, and it's a little bit too much information. But it is something that you do need to consider if you're moving from an animal-based complete amino acid protein source to a plant-based incomplete amino acid protein source. You need to make sure that you are supplementing or getting it from your diet at some other point, those 4 main amino acids, the lysine, tryptophan, methionine, and phenylalanine. Guys, that's a wrap for today's episode of MJ Everyday on the pros and cons of plant-based protein powder. As always, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn your post notifications on, both on your mobile, your cell phone, and your desktop PC, so you don't miss a beat when it comes to the Massive Joes YouTube channel. Until tomorrow, I'm coming to you from MassiveJoes.com. Stay massive.